Princes and Priests, Chapter 26, Strength of Will. The wind tugged Tavia's hair for a moment, and then it raced off in a column of heat that became a little whirlwind spinning across the hill. The charms and little bells that the children had tied into the slender braids at her temples jingled. The shaman told the little ones that such charms chased away the evil energies, and as a sign of affection, they shared such gifts. She curled one of the little braids back behind her ear. She watched her tea simmer, the heat of the fire and the motion of the water bringing out the energies and essence of the leaves and bits of herbs she had dropped in it. She reached out, as if to warm her hand in the steam of the tea, stirring the energies with a delicate motion of her finger. To her eyes, light swirled in the water, transforming it from mere water and plant oils to something so much more.
You do that pretty well.
She looked up at Elliot. The former captain looked rather fantastic, she thought. He was sun-tanned, his hair as wild as it could be and yet be clean, and his tattoos just showed from under his gear. He wore bits of his former life with the colors of the southern clans. He had somehow united these clans under his command and persuaded them to join the battle with their northern cousins, the nomads. He had the feathers, ribbons, and trinkets of the northern clans as well, all of it joyfully layered up with an almost childlike delight in how crazy he looked. She couldn't help but laugh at him a little.
What is that, Captain?
I know what you're doing.
He sank down to balance on his toes, in the same way Travis was prone to when looking at something on the ground.
My wife used to make spiced wine for the crew.
He almost laughed.
I couldn't see her do it, and I can't see you do it. But I know what you're doing. You are a bit better at hiding it, though. I'm surprised Shannon didn't catch you at it.
I have no idea what you're talking about,
she said, as calmly as she could.
Yeah, that's what she said too. I'm far too aware of things to miss it, though.
He sat over on the ground, hooking one arm around his knee.
You do well for them,
he said, glancing at the group of children for whom the tea was being made. They were going about their chores of the day, hurried and anxious with the anticipation of having some hot tea when done.
A cup of warm tea can help anyone. Children are often overlooked in war zones,
she said softly. He brought his gaze from the children to Tavia.
How is Travis?
She looked up at the former captain, not sure why he would care.
He amazes me at how well he is taking all of this.
I'm surprised at the gift that Shannon gave him.
His hearing? I'm still not sure how he did that.
Hearing is the simplest part of it. He gave much more: languages, understanding of terms and tones to start with. He gave him a part of himself, and let me tell you, there's not much of Shannon left to give.
Part of himself?
Within the vaults of all the wealth and power that Shannon holds, there is a small vial he keeps. It holds a tincture that he made before the war turned him into what he is now. I have seen it twice in my life, and I can feel its power in your son.
He smiled a little at some memory.
He used it on Dave, when Dave was about that age. Dave would have died without it. Shannon never really forgave me for the entire mess that forced him to use it. I disregarded his advice and nearly paid with the life of my son. It nearly cost all the family he has left. He is slow to trust me anymore.
What do you mean?
I let myself fall in love with a woman, and so opened myself to a weakness. As Shannon had warned, she was hunted down and taken from me. Her escape from her people was one thing. She was a low priority in the grand scheme of things when she first came to my ship. But then Dave was born. When they learned she had a son, they moved in with a lot of power. The idea of her having a living son was an abomination to her people.
Elliot was silent for a moment, then drew a deep breath and looked at Tavia, daring to trust her.
She was a priestess of an elven cult, and she was never supposed to have a son. She and her sisters were never supposed to lose their virginity.
He paused, lost in his recollections, and then continued.
They came to kill Dave and me. My life was one thing. Dave's was another. They did not count on who I was, or that I would have Shannon as an ally. I called on Shannon for help. He was there almost at once. The gate he used was like none I have ever seen, but then much of what he does is unlike anything anyone has ever seen. I was a far greater wizard then, but they ruined me. They hit Dave as well. Shannon arrived after they had already taken her, but he came in time to snatch Dave from them. Shannon pulled that little vial out and poured precious drops of life into my son, healing his wounds and his mind before he turned to help me. He cooled my burns and shielded me from further attacks. I lost my wife, but thanks to Shannon, they were driven from my ship. I'm sure they think us dead. They left me so burned inside that I'm sure, without Shannon's aid, I would have gone insane, certainly so if I'd lost Dave.
He shrugged.
I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure that he hunted them down later.
Your wife was something special, I take it.
To me and to the world,
He said with love filling his eyes even now.
she was a priestess. She had a lot of magics that she hid. I have seen you brush on a few of them. I almost find it hard to think you're honestly a human.
Ha ha ha.
Tavia laughed.
I failed to be many things, I think, but human I am. That is the one thing I am still certain of.
Human or elven, I see the priestess in you. You can deny it. I don't ask you to confirm it. I just wanted you to know I see it, and it makes me worry.
Worry?
She asked after a moment of studying her tea. She looked up to Elliot as he rose and stood watching the children.
I know how the world reacted to her son. I fear for yours. He has a whisper of a very ancient and powerful magic in him now.
He looked back to her.
But I think you did far more for Shannon and the others than they had any idea. You are so subtle and humble in your power that in the chaos of this place it would be easy to miss. I know Shannon. He will not last much longer. He is struggling to stay sane as it is and without your aid.
She looked back to the tea.
It was he who left me here, not I who left him.
I know. That makes me worry even more.
Why?
She asked, looking up again.
Shannon is complicated in many ways. He works very hard to make things simple. He rules with utter power and a cold hand. He allows no weakness and surrounds himself with those that he can kill without a hesitation. He avoids anyone he might pause over. He does not walk in the parks or deal with the common man. I expected him to grab Dave, meet me, and simply find a way to gate us out of here. He is that way for good reason.
Shannon is what Shannon is. I expected about the same of him. I don't know the relationship he has with you or Dave, but I know there is one. Dave went to great effort to hide it for fear of the reaction of the priests, I think.
Ha ha ha.
Elliot laughed.
He's my cousin.
Elliot said.
You're Purton?
She asked, a bit shocked.
Yes, under the scars and the masks and magics, I'm Purton. I tell people I am part human to help hide things, but I'm as Purton as any can be, I guess. Whatever I was got burned up pretty good, though. All I have for magic is what I have mastered since. The cores I had are charred and would drive a man crazy, if not for the tricks that Shannon taught me.
He does not share that sort of thing. I don't think you do either. Why are you telling me these things?
I have to get back to them. I have to protect Dave, and I have to help Shannon. If Dave is captured...
He shook his head.
I can't tell you how bad that would be. If Shannon loses control and, God forbid, he hurt Dave and later learned it was him. We can't have that. But I can't get out of here alone.
I know nothing of the shields or the way out. There's no way we can catch up to them.
I do know a great deal, and I can get us out of here. But I need your help, and I really think you should go with me.
Why? As you said, I can do a great deal of good for these people. I would be content to make tea for the children.
I know you would. That's why I tell you things, to make you understand what I'm asking you to be a part of. Not even my son knows who his mother was, or that he's a pure half-blood. Purton father and elven mother. He thinks his blood is far more blended than it is.
Tavia got up, took the little, almost flat teapot, and began to pour tea into the little cups of the nomads. As if they were called, the children came running to happily take the cups from her. She smiled and moved to make another pot.
Tavia,
He said softly as she sat down.
just help me get my son home where I can protect him. Please.
I am not a warrior.
She said, crumbling herbs with her fingers into the cold water.
I have my own son to consider, and I'm needed here. I went as far as I was asked to, and did what I could. Obviously, I wasn't as valued as you think I should have been. You assume a great deal of what I am. Maybe I just make good tea.
I think you are mistaken. I think you were valued, and that's why he ran as far and fast from you as he could. He took the first chance he saw that you would be safe and used it. I think he valued you far too much in his own mind.
She half laughed and shook her head.
Oh, hardly. I'm not that young to think so foolishly or to even wish such a thing.
Elliot sat down again and watched the fire for a bit, not saying anything, just looking troubled for a while, and then finally spoke.
Do you know what happens to a healer who is tortured?
Their cores kick into work and heal them.
They draw on the energies of the earth and will heal and heal and heal. It's a highly coveted prize for a blood to control a healer who is strong enough to be kept in constant distress, yet not die in the process. A blood who possesses a healer who can fuel them both is a powerful man. Consider what would happen to a healer in hell. There is no earth energy.
I don't know,
she admitted.
The core will burn itself up, turn itself inside out, and if the soul and mind are strong enough, draw on the power of that realm. Can you imagine the horror, the pain?
No,
she said.
I can't, and I don't wish to.
Now imagine you go through such a torment, having just watched your wife and children be tortured and murdered by demons, and all of it due to your soul-bonded partner. Imagine all you know ripped away, your life, your name, your flesh. Escape that. Come back and find yourself exiled, denied, and the bloodshed laid on you. Bit by bit, build yourself back into sanity, a sanity that allows you to steal back slivers of yourself. Build up a means to stand on your own feet, to stand up to the man who did that to you. Choke your rage down, swallow the grief, and move. Whatever you do, don't feel anything. If you risk it, you might lose grip on your rage and grief.
He folded both arms around his knee.
That is Shannon, the once healer priest, now immortally in pain. Then this happens, and he's pushed so far, my God. What was he thinking, exposing himself to the risks and demands he has endured for the group of you?
Elliot wiped his eyes.
What was he thinking? Risking getting within 100 miles of Oirion?
He looked up with the fear and distress clear in his eyes.
And the battle at the river? I have no idea what made him stay, but it was a terrible idea.
Jerome has done evils to this world that I can't, even for a moment, deny. I can't heal such things. I make tea. That's all I do,
she said softly, not even suggesting it may have been at her request that Shannon had stayed. Elliot ran a hand through his hair, tugging through the tangles, struggling with what he needed to do to convince her.
I'm sorry, Elliot,
she said.
I have to worry about Travis first, and he can be given a chance to be a normal child here.
Not if Shannon falls,
Elliot said with startling force. He wiped his eyes again. He took a deep breath.
He is a vampire, betrayed by the church.
He looked to her, expecting that to matter.
I know,
she said softly.
You know?
She nodded mutely. After a moment, she continued.
In fact, I have guessed as to what his rank would have to be to have such power and control, but that does not change my obligations to Travis.
Why?
Elliot appealed.
Every parent loves their child, but Tavia, he can come. I can give you any life you want outside the barrier.
He looked up from the fire as Travis put his little hand on his mother's shoulder. Tavia lifted her eyes to her son, seeing his very serious and sad expression.
There is nothing you can do,
Travis said to Elliot.
If you gated to them, you would tell Jerome right where he is. We can never reach him on foot, and if we interfere now, we will cost him what focus he has left.
Travis,
Elliot appealed gently.
I know you're a very smart child, but if Shannon doesn't have help, he will fall.
Yes,
Travis said softly.
He will fall. Not you, not my mother, not even I can stop that.
Elliot could not look away from the boy, nor could he accept that a child would say such a thing.
How can you say that?
Because he will.
I can't accept that.
Travis.
Tavia put a hand on her son to stop him from saying something more. He knelt by the fire, looking so innocent. He curled his long, coiling blonde hair behind his ears and reached his hands toward the fire.
Many people deny what they are able to do.
Travis spoke.
They fear, they overthink, they stop their actions. Time and again, the powers about them put them right where they must be in order to gain what they need for the tasks of the soul. But they stop, they turn away, and they shrink down. The greater the task, the greater the soul, the harder it is. When great souls collide, great and terrible things happen. Time and again, souls are brought together, and each time, if they deny the will of creation, it gets more forceful. And once again, now is the time. Souls are about to collide, and it will hurt.
He lifted his deep blue eyes to the man across the fire.
Creation cries for this to stop. Souls scream to heaven to make it end.
Elliot watched as tears filled the child's eyes.
Do you believe that God hears him? That God cares?
Travis asked.
I want to believe that, but I have seen too much.
Travis?
Tavia warned softly.
He will go if he does not understand.
Travis whispered to his mother.
He is already packed.
I am going,
Elliot said.
I had hoped you would come with me.
If you go, you and Dave will fall into Jerome's hands, and it will all be over.
It was all the child could do to not start crying. Elliot didn't understand, and didn't want to. He wanted to go and not feel so helpless. He couldn't stand to think of Shannon falling, or the pain that hell would inflict on Dave before the end. Tavia and Travis didn't comprehend who Shannon was. There was no way they would abandon him if they did. Elliot started to rise.
Tirafin.
Travis said desperately to stop him. Elliot stopped at the Purton name, a name that he had never used in public at all. He looked at the child.
I said he would fall. I did not say he was doomed. Please stay here with us and help these people. The people of this land need you, and if you stay, the land will heal you.
Shannon has been left and abandoned too many times. I don't know if he told you that name or not, but I'm still going. There's nothing you can say to make me leave him to this alone. Just as I see now that there is nothing that I can say to make you help him.
Elliot got up, ready to leave. Travis jumped up and grabbed his wrist. Elliot turned to pull away, but he was not let go of. He took a step, but that moved him out of the plains of the nomads to a place so clear that he could see the very trees on the mountains that soared up to the brilliant blue sky. He could see the stars even in the sunlight. The moons cast softness to the brightness of it all. The hills were alive to the brink of the snowfields, with little lilies coming to life against the cold end of winter.
Look at me,
Travis said.
No.
Elliot refused, terrified of what he might see behind him.
Elliot,
A man's voice said softly.
you continue to deny me.
This is a trick, either some spin of demonic magics, or the trick of a woman angry at a man who set her aside.
No, no trick. Look at me.
Elliot didn't want to. He struggled for all that he was worth to not do it, but he had no choice. Compelled, he finally turned, standing there just as he appeared in every dream, on every wall, and in the very features of the line of his descendants, was Armand. Elliot could not deny it, even if he wanted to. He could hardly stay on his feet as he started to shake and cry.
Why?
Was all that he could choke out.
Why have you allowed all this?
Armand shook his head.
No, I tried to stop it.
He was your son. He was your priest.
Elliot almost regretted his words when he saw the tears that they caused.
I cannot explain, not even here, but you must trust me. Stay with me. Help me. You do not know what even this will cost me.
If he will fall, how can I?
He must.
Armand said.
There is no other way that he will be desperate enough to allow for another soul to touch him. Oirion must come to understand the truth without a word spoken. Tharadon must face his fears and accept his place. David must become his own man. Many, many parts must fall into place, and if you are there, they will crumble, and it will all be for nothing. Please. This.
He gestured around.
This will set me so far back.
He looked around sadly before he looked back to Elliot.
I will need you to help me survive this childhood. I cannot help him until I have the power to do so, and no child can hold that.
Elliot swallowed hard.
I won't be able to talk of this, will I?
No.
Does Tavia know who you are?
Yes.
It's said that those who see your face live to serve you.
Armand smiled faintly.
I cannot make you more than you chose to be. If you choose to walk with me, it may serve the world well, but I do not ask it of you. I ask only that you try to trust me, and that you do not go south.
Elliot had to look away. He couldn't stand to see the pain and grief in the face of the founder of his race. He squeezed his eyes shut, telling himself that Armand was not a god. He was just an angel. All Pertons knew that. Archangel was just another word for the same thing that others called gods. All good pirates knew that.
Why don't you just kill Jerome?
That will serve no purpose. He is in fact the last best defense we have against the emergent forces.
I don't understand.
Elliot turned back, certainly not expecting that.
I do not expect you to. I cannot explain it either. You must just trust me.
There was a moment that felt as if the world dropped away. Smoke rose up, swirling out of the fire, and Travis swayed. His eyes rolled back as his body began to sink to the ground. Elliot caught the child as he fell. Tavier was right there, concern and fear in her eyes.
Travis?
She touched his young face. Elliot drew the child up into his arms.
Let's lay him down. I think he is just tired.
She looked at the captain a moment.
Are you staying?
Yes,
He said softly.
at this point, I pretty much have to.
The prison was unpleasant, Ivan decided, even by prison standards. The smell was worse than most, but then most didn't have the rotting corpses of the dead still locked in cuffs. He had no idea what had happened to the others. When the ship had pulled into harbor, the guards had come in with clubs and needles of drugs. He had blurry images of being dragged along, through hallways and down a flight of stairs. He had images of Kelly being stripped and beaten to her knees, her proud, powerful body taken down to the floor with whips and batons. He had Raven's voice in his head, roaring in helpless frustration, trying to get someone to hold on, to not surrender. Ivan's head itched, but he didn't even twitch to scratch. He had been in one of Jerome's hellholes before. Here he was again, bound in chains, bolted to the floor in an eerie echo of the past. He had taken his own beating, but he had felt far worse in his lifetime. The weight of the chains was rubbing his shoulders raw, but he barely noticed. He could seek to escape, he could fight his way out as once he had. But he couldn't leave, not without the others. Alas, there was no way he could save them. How delighted Jerome would be to have Ivan on his knees again. His hands were so beaten that he couldn't even see his knuckles through the swollen purple mess. The cuffs squeezed painfully. They were far too small for his hands in the first place, but with the swelling added, they cut his skin and made him bleed. Somewhere, not too far off, someone was being beaten. He could hear the cries, the sound of the clubs on a body. That one would die. That man had started out too vocal, wailing after just a few hits. Now the hits came too fast, and the wailing began to cease. It seemed a world away that he had sat and laughed at a campfire with friends, actually thinking that he might tell them who he was. In that moment, he seemed to have been alive again. But here he was. Maybe all of it was a joke. Maybe he had never left the pits at all, and everything he had done was nothing but demonic illusions. Soon they would come and drown him in the very water of his sacred pools. For a day, he had thought that the gods had acted and brought together such powers as could unite against the evil, putting an end to the dark spiral of demonic domination. If Jerome had Dave, it was over. Ivan had seen the Guardian bow to him and then salute Shannon. Ivan was not stupid. He knew what that meant. Now it was over. The heirs of the Empire were lost. He didn't look up at the sound of footsteps, light and fast. He didn't move as someone ran into the cell he was trapped in. He was more aware of a bead of sweat that was running down his temple into the corner of his eye. He was thinking of the battle with the goblins and how they had all fought together. His mind spun away to that last battle with his men, his sons and brother dead about him, betrayed. He remembered falling to his knees, pulling his hair out in grief and pain. Blood loss had stolen his freedom and nearly his life, but somehow he survived and was found. He awoke imprisoned in chains. Ivan didn't stir as a small form ducked behind him, panting for breath and cowering. He might have paid no heed to the small person, but for the fact of the smell, sweet like Salma almost, but hotter, muskier. Heavy footsteps rushed past, a few slowed. The hiding one caught her breath, freezing like a rabbit about to be pounced on. Ivan didn't move. The men moved on, allowing the person to catch a breath and sink to the floor with relief. Ivan blinked away the grit and the lack of focus from his eyes. He hurt. Oh gods, he hurt. He groaned a little, thinking of the many injuries he had taken on this trip. With all things considered, he had gone a long time with little pain for it all. Someone in the group must have had some sort of magic to block pain for him and the others. Ivan wondered if it had been Theo. He had seen the man's arm nearly ripped off, and he had dealt with the pain with shocking dignity. It had to have hurt like hell, or was it Oirion? His mind went back to the figure that was behind him. The figure moved from behind him to the doorway. Ivan looked up, blinking a few times to be certain that he was seeing right. The figure was a woman. She was fantastically curvy, not in an overripe way, but in a racial way. Her entire body was ripped with muscle, and yet, unlike most races that had females so muscled, she held on to her femininity like a goddess might. That was not, however, the most shocking thing about her. It was her hair, he thought. Red. Not just red hair like he had seen so often in his own race, but red like blood, red like a rooster's head or a dragon's scale. To further her shocking look, she had fine scales down her arms and legs, almost in a serpentine manner. He had to think they were fantastic tattoos. As she moved, he saw that under her long hair, the scales went down her spine as well. He had to pause a moment, wondering how a woman was running around naked in these halls without some sign of abuse. She saw him looking at her and darted to him. She dropped to her knees, catching his face in her hands. She tried to speak to him, but he didn't know the language. Even if he had, he might not have heard her. He just looked at her cat-like green eyes with their slit pupils. She looked back over her shoulder, then began to pull at his chains, trying to get them off.
"They are spelled,"
he said, shaking his head.
"Just run and hide, little thing. You cannot help me."
"Help me,"
she pleaded, copying him. It was almost as if she understood what he was saying, but had to hear it first. He looked to her little fine hands, pulling at the cuffs at his wrists. To his shock, and with a great deal of pain, she got one to snap open. Blood rushed, making him gasp.
"Help me,"
she pleaded, starting to cry, as footsteps were coming back. She got the second cuff open, just as the guards ran in. These were not the guards from below, but well-dressed, powerful men. As they grabbed at her, she gripped Ivan's leg chains, fighting to get him free. She twisted and swiped at the nearest man. It was the same instantaneous motion that Ivan had seen Salma do before. Her claws slashed his face, causing him to shout in pain. She kicked at them, her grip on the chains white-knuckled as they tried to drag her away.
"Help me,"
she sobbed to Ivan. Her eyes locked on his face, desperate for help. She was hit with a rod, sending enough power through her to make her whole body convulse. She was ripped off the chains and pulled aside. Struggling to not be taken, she tried to fight, despite the shock that her body was still in. The men had other plans, and she didn't even have the advantage of having clothes to help fight them off. Ivan looked down to his released hands, to the chain that still bolted his middle to the floor. There was a ring that his leg chains ran through, but now it was just that one bolt that held him. She snarled and roared at them, like a lion might. She kicked one in the chest, sending him staggering back. Ivan struggled to get up. Squatting low, with his feet flat on the stone floor, he gathered his strength to stand upright. The chain would not allow it, but if he could reach the point where he was upright, he would be free. He focused on the chain as it became taut. It held him bent, unable to make his legs straight. Forcing his hands to work, he gripped the chain, and several of his shattered hand bones slipped as he gripped it. The pain made him gasp and shout, but he pulled. With the cuffs off and the magic laid in them not binding him, he reached inside himself for the strength that he knew he had, a strength that was hidden away, the true power of his bloodline, the one thing that not even Jerome could take away. Ivan had hidden it so well that, even when Jerome had stood over him all those years ago, Ivan had been thought of as nothing but just another Ezerin. It all seemed a lifetime ago when he had been another man. Jerome had not known who Ivan was then, and Ivan would not let Jerome conquer him now. With the strength gained from the months with his friends, he reached for that hidden power. His muscles strained and his skin shivered. He roared, this time not as a man, but deep and thunderous. Power rushed out of him, unleashed for the first time in over 800 years. He watched as his arms rippled with light, and his hands became his paws. His strength and size alone ripped the chain bolt right out of the floor, bits of stone still attached. Ivan had taken the form of the great golden grizzly, the representation of the king of Azir. Now, in full bear form, he moved with unearthly swiftness. One great swipe crushed the man standing with his pants down around his knees. The great bear roared at them, rage and pain making the very air shiver. He attacked another, ripping his claws through the man's chest. Half of the man's torso was slashed away and splattered against the wall. The smell of blood and fresh meat filled the room. He leapt forward and sank his teeth into another, and then flung him aside, entrails still hanging from Ivan's now massive maw. The woman slashed her way free from the stunned grip of the man who had hold of her, as Ivan tore into the other men who had attacked her. She grabbed at Ivan's golden fur, his clothes having shred away to nothing. Desperate, she crawled to his back and clung on. Ivan knew Jerome would feel this, and know that the Aziran was here, in the city, right in Jerome's own cellars. It was time to go, and fast. He charged out the door, crushing anyone in his way. He had no idea how to get out, or what way to go, but he kept going. Leaving the guards and voices behind and out of sight, he changed tactics. He began to carefully slip through doors, leaving as little trail as he could. His great paws passed silently over the stone floor. He wound through the labyrinth, into deeper halls. He had no idea how far he'd gone or how he had gotten there, but he could smell salt water. The ocean was not far. He followed the smell until pain and size allowed him to go no farther. Lacking the ability to hold on any longer, he simply sank to the floor, the form of the bear fading away, leaving him naked, beaten, and just a man on the cold stone floor. The little woman grabbed him, pulling him up, pleading with him to keep moving. Ivan crawled as much as walked beside her. She took him into the darkness as if she could see, making him drag his body through holes where she could pass without effort, but small enough that he had to force his body to gain even an inch. His skin was ripped and torn by such doorways until she let him collapse for a moment of rest. She had found some sort of floor drain that had a small updraft, but bars that had been broken off cut at his sides as he forced his way down into it. Encouraged by the little woman and the fresh air, he summoned up enough strength to make himself carry on, despite the depth of the gashes he was inflicting on himself. Then he dropped, fell a few yards, and hit cool water. He found his feet and stood. He was afraid that he was going to fall over and drown in the knee-deep water, but she was there, taking his hand and leading him along. She let him lie down just as soon as she got him out of the water and onto cool stone. It was so wonderful to just lie down. There was only a moment before he was unconscious. There was something about being in such a place that made Dave wonder if fate somehow was stacked against him. He had thought that they would be taken to Jerome or one of his men or killed. He didn't think that he would be tossed into a rat hole, being dragged out only to be beaten. Something deep inside him was terrified that they might learn who he was. Hiding his magics, the magic that Shannon demanded he keep secret, was worth more than his life. He would die to hide the fact that he was a blood relation of Shannon. Nothing was more important than that. He didn't bother to try to move at all. It would just hurt too much and would gain him nothing. So he just lay on the floor, not moving. They had crossed mountains so high that there was no air to breathe. They had fought against zombies and goblins. They had crossed the grassland, the bog, and traveled the halls of Ulam Ar. And here he was lying in a cell with common thieves and murderers. He, son of Elliot Sailor, was beaten and lying on the floor of a cell. He'd rather have been washed overboard into the ocean, to drift into the dark depths when his strength ran out. He wanted to reach out and slip away. He didn't understand why they were beating him like they were. They asked nothing, they demanded nothing, just pounded on him. His thoughts slipped from the place where he now was, dreams bringing relief for a moment, as he stood in the twilight snow with Theo. In his dreams, however, Theo was not the thin little man that he appeared to be. He was the man that he was in the tent in Awens. They walked together, kindred souls, brothers. For a moment he wasn't alone. His dream ended abruptly as he was grabbed and jerked up. He tried to get his feet under him to take the strain off his shoulders and arms. He couldn't tell how many of his tattoos they had burned off, but that was the way of burns. The pain spread out from the point of contact and lingered. It wasn't too far to the place they used to torture people. He knew the way well enough. It wasn't a question of being tortured or not. It was, by what means would it be today? Dave was hauled up to a hardwood table, smooth and stained black from long use. Cuffs of painful metal snapped onto his wrists and pulled his body tight. He felt the choker that he wore slip, and the thongs fall against his neck, cool and present. He wanted to grab hold. Where was Shannon? Why wasn't he there yet? Dave blinked, and there, appearing out of the darkness, was the one he had been expecting to see. Dave knew that the man would be here sooner or later. It was Jerome himself. The man was skinny, stripped of all youth, like a living skeleton. His eyes all but black pits, his hair long and white, perfectly kept, his holy robes hidden under a long black cloak. Around him, darkness seethed, demons eager for blood and souls.
"Are you certain he was on the ship?"
"Yes,"
another said.
"He is David Sailor, the captain's son. His tattoos confirmed it."
"Was he traveling alone?"
Jerome asked, walking closer.
"No, he had several with him. None of them as you described."
"I see. Amazing that he made it this far."
"He is very strong, Your Grace."
Dave was terrified. If the demons about Jerome touched him, Dave would be known as being related to Shannon. Of all the things in the world, that would be the worst.
"You certainly didn't leave much to him, did you? You know how I feel about a person's face being beaten."
"He fought with my men. He left them little choice."
Dave watched the man, who was supposed to be the holiest man alive, walk up to the side of his table.
"I can make this end, David,"
he said softly, with a tone that might be taken as compassion.
"All you have to do is tell me where the others are."
Now it had begun. Now the truth was out. Dave rolled his head away, knowing that he had one hope. That last hope was to be killed before he was broken.
"I will make him talk,"
a voice said, the grit and growl to it as cold as ice, identifying it all too well as a demon. Dave didn't think he could cry at this point, but he felt the tears on his temple. He could possibly stand up to what men could do to his body, but what a demon could do to his mind and soul was another thing entirely.
"Your Grace,"
a man said from another corner of the room, slightly out of breath.
"She has escaped."
"She has escaped?"
Jerome asked.
"Yes, escaped."
"Catch her,"
he ordered simply.
"She has left the fortress."
"How?"
Jerome demanded.
"From what we can tell, she summoned a bear."
"A bear?"
"Azirin.
The demon snarled after a moment.
He is here."
"A giant? Is there a giant?"
"Yes, Grace. He was brought in with this one. They chained him up in the orc cell."
"Find him. He is worth far more than any sailor brat or my daughter."
Dave lay still, not able to truly believe what had just happened. From another cell, another place, Ivan had just saved his soul. He couldn't dare to think it. Surely he would at least be drowned today, as the guards had to get amusement somehow. He was pulled off the table and taken down the hall. They went past the cell that he had been kept in to a larger common cell and flung him in. He staggered 2 steps before he hit the floor. If he'd had the strength, he might have sobbed for relief. However, if they got hold of Ivan and broke him, as Shannon had said,
All men can be broken.
Dave's magics would be revealed and the guards would be back swiftly. He flinched, despite himself, as someone scrambled over to him. His first day here, the beating he had gotten from cellmates, had been worse than the beating from the guards. He had lost what clothes he had left and all of his dignity, along with most of his hair. At this point, that day was just a blur, with no real effects but to flinch away from those who came too close.
Dave? Dave?
He peeled his eyes open to try to see through the dark as he was rolled over to his side. He saw a familiar silhouette. After nearly a year of traveling with the group and the many midnight wake-ups, he knew exactly who it was. He used all his strength to reach up and touch Orion's chest.
I lost my dagger,
Dave said, thinking that if he had it, Oirion could kill him. It would be so neat and clean. No pain, no broken soul, no demons to take him.
Back off,
Oirion snarled at another who had moved in closer. He pulled Dave from the open center of the cell, back to the darkest corner where bits of straw had gathered up.
It's all right, Dave,
he said, pulling Dave back against his chest. Oirion had him. He wasn't alone now. The priest's arms were like armor about Dave at that point. For once, he was able to drop off to sleep. How long he slept, he didn't know, but he felt far better for it. Better was far from all right, but at least he could think a bit more clearly. He dared to open his eyes and look down at the hands interlocked around him, holding him safe. In the dark, he could not be certain of hands, but he knew the ring. There was likely to be only one man wearing a ring down here.
Oirion?
He dared to whisper the name. Oirion stirred and let go.
Try not to move yet.
Oirion breathed in his ear.
It will disrupt the magic and leave evidence of it.
Dave lay still, his friend a wall of warm support. When Oirion finally pushed him up, he tried to sit, but without a hand to his shoulder, he wouldn't have been able to. He hurt inside and out. His mouth was so dry, he was surprised that his tongue was able to even work.
He's here,
Dave breathed.
Don't say the name, don't say the name,
he whispered, remembering once being a child and having Shannon hold him tight in his arms, whispering that in his ear. It was a memory that he didn't understand and didn't really want to.
Dear God.
Oirion touched Dave's face.
What did you say to piss them off that bad?
Nothing.
Dave half chuckled at that. He looked over at Oirion through the eye that he could see out of. Oirion wasn't a lot better off than he was, but he at least had a face.
You see the others?
Dave asked.
No.
Ivan is still here, or was. He escaped his cell and his distraction drew them off me.
Dave started to cry, thinking of Ivan laughing at the fire, his eyes dancing with humor. The big man would be caught, and he would be broken. Dave sank to the side, the best his broken body would allow, folding over to the shelter of Orion's lap. Oirion put a hand on his shoulder.
I know, Dave, I know.
Oirion put his head back against the wall. It was just a matter of time now. Ivan jerked awake. The sound of surf was loud and close, and there was nothing else to be heard. It took his eyes a moment to adjust, before he saw, in the faint reflecting light, a large stone channel about him. Rolling up despite the pain, he could see the opening to a gray world beyond. The ocean tides rolled up the channel, making the water wash back and forth, nearly rushing up over the walkway ledges that ran along both sides. He was naked, alone, and in pain. Just as the last time he had run from Jerome, he had to always keep moving, and salt water was his friend. He stumbled along the wall, one hand on it, keeping himself up. With the other hand, he held his sides that were cut, bleeding, leaving a trail that even a child could follow. If he could just get outside, he could escape. As he stumbled, he made his mind work. He made himself say the words, forcing himself to summon up the bits of shattered soul and power that his God still had left. With the open end of the channel in sight, he felt the demonic scan hit him like a shove in the back. With a desperate shout, he ran forward, but stumbled and fell, tripping on his own feet. He hit the ground hard and lay there for a moment. The surf washed up the outside wall, splashing him with relief and hope. The demon was moving in, and a gate was being built not far behind him, exactly where he had been standing a moment before. He reached the lip of the doorway and could see the ocean and the harbor full of ships beyond. The drop from the walkway to natural stone and freedom wasn't far, but it was enough that it stole the breath out of him as he hit the raw, rough boulder. The tide roared in, slammed against him, and flooded back up the channel, disturbing the demon's power for a brief moment. Squinting up at the sky, even let go of the rock he gripped. The ocean had given him just enough time, and he used it. He leapt upward, breaking free of the water just as the gate ripped open behind him. Beating his wings, he left the ground, aiming for the nearest flock of birds to hide in. He caught the air and veered for the docks, circling into a flock of birds that dove and dipped for fishermen scraps. He looked back. He could see the mouth of the channel that poured out to the receding tide and the newly opened gate. Coming through the gate was not only the demon in the form of a black shadow, but Jerome himself. Even beat his wings harder. He doubted that he would blend in long, but for now he had been saved again and had escaped by a hair's breadth from the man who had hunted him for centuries. He knew that he would not be able to fly all day, and every time he touched the ground, the demon would be able to feel him. He'd have to hide on ships and hope that he was not eaten by the crew. Right now, he needed to just rest and try to breathe. There was a danger to what he was doing. The longer he stayed this way, the more like a bird he would think and move. Eventually, his mind would be lost. He had already tested that before and nearly didn't get it back. Fate was funny. Kelly had proved to not be as fun as they had hoped, so here she was, locked in a hole in the ground with no light, no food but for the rats she caught, and no way out. She chuckled to herself a little as she scraped the rat hide with a bit of bone to begin the tanning of it. They had raped her. They had had her raped by a half-mad orc, something rather like Kava's people, but different. Kava had said that his people were the descendants of a war where the elven souls had mastered the warped flesh. But what if there was another side and a race where the orc soul had won out? Likely. The guards had tried to use her as a test subject. Magics had been spun and put on her, forced through her to make that vile thing stick and stay. They gloated to find her womb had taken, but foolish little men, they forgot to check before they started. Safe and secure was a secret that she would hide to the end, a secret that would keep her sane and whole. They could take away all trace of time from sky or sound, but within her she knew the time. She could track it just fine. Her goddess had exiled her and driven her away, but in the end, when it was all said and done, her secret would be taken away to safety. She could kill those men, rip their souls out, and feed them to whatever demon came first. She couldn't even tell if her eyes were open or closed anymore, but she tried to hold them shut and thought of Dave, praying to his God that he was safe. She knew better. Eventually, she relented and simply held on to the hope that he would be killed before he was revealed and broken. She put her hand on her stomach. So long as the line of von Armand lived, the gates of hell would hold. The houses of kings would hold back darkness by breath alone. She would sit in her dark hole, and when the time came, she would summon the demon soul of Tyrell von Armand, pull him from wherever he was, and hand him the secret. Her child would know only Norwood as home. The darkness, the isolation, the abuse here would not break her. She had been through far worse at the hands of her own goddess to be so easily felled.
Do not ruin this child's soul with thoughts of anger or revenge,
she told herself.
Save it for later. Be at peace, woman. Give him foundations of holier things than this place.
Thank you for listening. Please click on the like and subscribe buttons so that we can continue sharing content with you. The journey has just begun.